It's 2014 all over again. Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah,
I like your beard.
Oh, thank you.
It really suits you.
I just finally decided to break down and grow one. The couple of times I tried before, I'd get about 2 weeks in. Just but I figured, I'm working at home. I can be in the as a cave troll, and figured I'd give it a shot, and it's actually working out pretty well. So.
Now that most of the kids have left the basement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now that I know myself. How have you been?
I've been great. I'm kind of figuring out what sport is running. Climbing.
Good.
I'm going to work 3 days a week and, for the summer. Manage that. We're not so busy in the summer anyway.
Yeah.
More climbing, and that's starting in June.
Oh, cool. That's cool. Yeah.
Hopefully the weather works.
Well, yeah, it's actually supposed to be like summer for us, I heard. So, yeah, like that. Yeah.
That would be nice actually. That's really great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yes. Yeah, just started these 2 weeks ago, and already they've got 40 firefighters out there, 2 helicopters, 4 square kilometers.
I was hiking through there, and I remember thinking, "Oh, this is really dry," and looking around us.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
A lot of that area hasn't even recovered from.
Yeah.
Yeah, last year the fires were really bad. Homes destroyed, like one whole town pretty much. And then one fire was way up north, river, that's apparently been under fire. Now they're like, oh right, I'll right back up now. Did you need any help set up in there with the stream? So you don't have a satellite cohort, but we still do the stream. Yeah.
Doing a stream.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got Calgary. I eventually got to a point where I just kind of like, yeah. Yeah, the new gig is so nice. I'm getting so much work done. Loving it so much. Um, ready to start. Make sure you got a mic. Start, click on split 2.
Okay.
And that'll be live. And then when you break, you're done.
Okay.
Yeah, I've already pasted the link in the platform for you. So when you and that's the YouTube link, you're just going to be in the first channel. You're welcome. I try. Yeah, they'll wander in eventually. All right, I'm going to get started here in a sec. Oh yeah, lecture. Already? Alrighty. Good morning. Good morning, Calgary. Calgary, I've got Slack open on my phone here on the podium, so I'll see you if you talk. So, front end week, lots of fun, and want to break into this idea of a different way, a more modern way of addressing the client-server communication. Right now, everything you've done so far with HTTP, whether you're doing it with TinyApp, whether you're starting to do it with Tweeter, is what we would call transactional. Meaning very straightforward, your client sends a request to the server responds back with a resource, client typically renders that resource as a web page, and ta-da, we're done. This is the very traditional web, transactional web that we know. Well, we can do that a different way, a better way, a smoother way that benefits the user, and that's doing requests asynchronously. Because this transactional method is very, very synchronous in the sense that you make a request, you wait until the request comes back with a response, you do something with the response, you click on a button, make a new request, very one thing after the other. Asynchronous is a very different world. And asynchronous took us a while on the web to get to the point that we were able to use it. If you happen to be alive and old enough to use a computer and were online in the late 90s, I will say roughly 1995 to the 2000 period, there were chat rooms technically, and there was quote unquote live webmail at that time, but it used a really gross, dirty hack to do what it was going to do. And what that hack was this tag here. And that would go in the head of your page. And what this would tell the browser to do when this got rendered as HTML, the meta tag would go in the head, so it wouldn't show anything on the page. But what it would tell the browser to do is every 5 seconds to refresh the page to this domain. So once you've signed in, it's just going to keep sending. And of course, with the way HTTP headers work, you've signed in, you've got an authorization cookie. So it's going to keep sending that cookie every time the page refreshes. So you'll stay signed in, and you'll just have to deal with the fact that every 5 seconds, your screen blinks. You might be in the process of composing an email at that point. So they had to have pop-out editors so that the email composition or the chat composition was technically in a different window. So you'd click to send a message, you'd get the little pop-out. It would keep refreshing in the back to see if there was new stuff. You'd type your message or type out your email, hit send. That little window would go away. You'd see your message show up in the main window. It was a gross hack, but that was the way that we did real-time communication about 100 million years ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and before we had anything asynchronous. And then a magical year happened, 1999, 20 years ago. In March of 1999, a company that was not known for innovating on the web released something kind of cool. Microsoft had Outlook, which was the big, weighty enterprise email business client that connected to an Exchange server. Microsoft released something called OA, which was Outlook Web Access. And so this was webmail for your corporate enterprise Exchange-based account. And OA changed all the rules. And the reason OA changed all the rules is you could be logged into OA and your page wouldn't flash every 5 seconds or however long the delay was. You would be sitting there and you could click a refresh or check mail button, actually is what it says, get mail, and mail would just show up. And in fact, periodically, mail would just show up in your window and the screen never refreshed. And that's because they had invented a technology called AJAX. And AJAX changed the way that we did the web. AJAX is one of the lovely acronyms we have, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And if it weren't for AJAX, honestly, JavaScript would have probably died roughly about 5 years after this. Because JavaScript, when it first came out, really didn't do much other than like make rollover buttons and enable the Comet cursor and the Bonsai Buddy and all that kind of crap to be on your system. It wasn't really helping things. But AJAX changed the web. And because of AJAX, we got the period known as Web 2.0. And Web 2.0, I mean, a lot of people make the joke that Web 2.0 is just AJAX and rounded corners and gradients, and they're not wrong. But Web 2.0 ushered in the era of web applications. And this changed everything for web devs and for users. Because here's the scenario. You're sitting at your desktop and you're in Outlook, the actual application. And mail just shows up and you're able to just click a button and compose a mail in the application, and everything is one seamless experience in that application. But on the web, if you want that kind of real-time communication going, or if you want that kind of data processing, it's really slow because you're typically having to re-render whole pages every single time. And this was way before Chrome, back when IE ruled the earth and it was a terrible beast. And so this idea that we could now use logic built into the page and start having start having this experience of just being immersed in the browser window and doing the things that we wanted to do there instead of having to leave and go to an application to do real work. So Web 2.0 was fueled by AJAX, and AJAX is the ability to have your browser window open and in the background fire off an HTTP request to a server, get back a response, and then programmatically do something with it instead of having to refresh the whole page. It's the idea that if I, for example, go to someplace like McDonald's and I walk up and I place my order, I don't have to go home and change clothes to come back and get my order and then eat it. And, do that for the burger and then for the fries and then for the drink. That would be ridiculous. But that's kind of how we were using and building the web up to that point. So AJAX gives us this ability to send off requests in the background that just keep that page loaded and let us programmatically do something with it. And they built it for the web platform. And if you peel back the hood, and if you really want to know, the code that Microsoft invented in JavaScript as an object called XML HTTP request. And what it did was it allowed this HTTP request to be sent off with the expectation that it was going to get XML back. In the mid-90s, Microsoft committed to XML as the data format, and they didn't look back for 20 years, and only now are they like, oh yeah, crap, we probably shouldn't have done that. But XML HTTP request is what they invented. It got added into JavaScript fully in March of 1999 with a particular release of IE, and it's still there. In fact, everything Ajax that we do in the browser is still powered by this object, which is a native part of JavaScript. So next time you want to bash Microsoft, they gave us Ajax. Not bad. And browsers all had roughly the same implementation of this XML HTTP request, which was kind of cool because that meant that if you were a web developer, you could now write your code once and have it work in every browser. That was also kind of powerful, at least for the Ajax code. All the code for manipulating the DOM, that was a problem. That's why jQuery got invented later on. But for the longest time, we were writing XML HTTP requests manually. And so I have pulled up an example here of what this code looks like. This is straight off of MDN. So we have a button, and it's got an ID of Ajax button on it. We'll make a request. We've got a script tag here. We have this function being run. Does anybody know what it's called with a function wrapped in parentheses like this? I'll put it here in Slack, or in Sublime rather. That. Yes, immediately invoked function expression, also known as an IFI. It's a cool little trick in JavaScript, because in JavaScript, if you put parentheses at the end of anything, it guarantees that you are trying to execute it as a function. So that means that this set of parentheses here is telling JavaScript to take whatever was right before it and invoke it as a function. So the first time you put parentheses around something in JavaScript, it evaluates it as an expression and returns whatever the result of that evaluation is. So if we define a function in here, then what's going to come back is a function definition. And then if we put another set of parentheses on the end of that, it tries to run it as a function. And because it's a function definition, it will run. And so it gets immediately invoked. We don't have to wait for document ready. We don't have to, there's no timeouts or callbacks or anything like that. This is just literally run this function right now. I'm going to define it right here, run it right here, and that's how it gets used. So we have an IFI here. So we're telling the browser, run this right now, right here at this point in the page. Defining a variable called HTTP request. And this is old school, like vanilla JavaScript, no jQuery here. So get element by ID, Ajax button, which refers to this button up here. And right away, we're just going to chain add event listener click. And that means when we click the button, we're going to call the function make request. Well, here's the function make request right here. So what make request does is it assigns to that HTTP request variable a new XML HTTP request object. And if we don't get an object, then that means that doesn't exist in this browser. We don't have any browsers now which don't support Ajax, but this was a valid check at the time. Then what we're going to do is XML HTTP request has a callback handler that we want to use, and it's called onReadyStateChange. Sucks to type that out, I promise. And what happens is if, basically that's saying, if you think about a drag race car on the line getting ready to take off, there's the point where it pulls up, there's the point where, the guy's set, burns the tires, is, waiting for the lights to go. There's all these different states of being ready, right? So this HTTP request object is going to have various states of being ready. And if that state changes, we want to run the function alert contents. Then we're going to open a GET request to test.html, and we're going to send that request. Opening the request and sending the request are two different options. Then that request is now gone out into the ether, and it's asynchronous, so we don't know exactly when it's going to come back. But when it gets a response and its state changes, we will then run this function here, alert contents. So if the ready state is done, and this is just a property of the original XML HTTP request, technically done is number 2. There's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if the state is done, and if the status code we get back is a 200, status codes are critical. Status codes are what tell us how to deal with the data we get back. Then we can alert the response text. Otherwise, there was a problem. And this will work. Like to this day, this will work. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this code and let's make ourselves an HTML page. I'll just leave that there. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I will just chuck it on my desktop as ajax.html. And what we're going to change is we're going to change where we're going to fetch data from. And we're going to, we'll use the dog API because Mona likes dogs. So if I make a request to this URL, it will give me back a JSON object that is a URL of a random dog picture. What can go wrong? And here's what's interesting about Ajax now, is that now 99 times out of 100, we're going to use JSON as the actual data transport. We're not going to use XML. XML is old and clunky and hard to work with and has to be validated and a few other things. And JSON is a far more efficient way to transfer data. But AJAX isn't quite as sexy of an acronym as Ajax. So we didn't change the acronym. But now, almost all the time, when you make a request, it's going to be JSON. So we're going to make a GET request to that URL. And in this case, what we're going to do, let's add, there we go. We'll give ourselves an ID there. Document.querySelector results. Inner text is HTTP request.response text. So whatever we get back for right now, we're just going to save it as text and put it in that element on the page. So let's actually watch this work. I have to remember which editor I'm in. I will open this in my browser. Okay, so let's add in a little bit of logging just so that we can see things happen. So make request. Clicked on button. sent request. And alert contents is what's going to run when we get a response back. Got response. And then if it worked, then we'll see it show up there. Okay. So .intertext is not a function, right? You are correct. It is not a function. It is a property that I have to set. You guys should have caught that. One more time. Make a request. And there's our response. Page did not refresh. I just got data back and threw it onto the page. And if we look at what happened over here in the console, we get the clicked on the button, got response, sent request, and got 3 responses. So that's kind of interesting. Oh, go away. And we can keep doing this. And we can keep getting all these responses. But if we really want to investigate things a bit further, what we can do is we can go over here and we can look at our network screen. So if I make a request, on your network, XHR is your AJAX tab, because XHR is XML HTTP request. So there's me sending the request. Let's slide this over here. And the response I got back was that. But interestingly, apparently it fired off a couple times. Oh, I know why. It has bound the click handler a few times for some weird reason. But I was able to make a request and get back the response that I wanted, which is cool. And so that puts me in an interesting position, because it means that now I can make a request, get some data back, and do something with it. Something programmatic, something meaningful to my application. So let's say, hypothetically, I change this from a div tag to an image tag, just with ID equals results right now. And said that our data is going to be json.parse http request.response text. And then I'm going to have status and message is going to be my URL. So what I will do is I will set the source property to data.message. I'll take that URL and set it as the source property of the image, which should make a dog show up on the screen. So we'll refresh. Ta-da! The delay there was, the funny part is it took longer to actually get the dog image from the internet and get it to load than it did to get the data back. But there's our image. And now I can sit here and click all day, and I have literally given myself an app that lets me get random dog pictures. So if you are bored one day at boot camp because you have so much time to be bored, you can literally take this code and sit there and look at random dog pictures. But here's the problem. The problem is that every single time I want to do this, for every single request that I might want to make, for every bit of data that I might want to get back from a server, I have to rewrite this code every single time. Because I basically have to make a new object, new XML HTTP request for each request. So imagine, for example, I had, let's just say, I don't know, a basic like address book.
kind of application. I was making a contacts app, and I'd have to make, I could load the page, and then if I wanted to load all of my contacts, I'd have to write all this code for the request to deal with all the contacts. And then if I want to show a specific contact, I'd have to write the request to go get the data for that one contact, and then when it comes back, show that. If I want to add a contact, edit a contact, any of my CRUD kind of create, read, update, delete kind of functions, I'd have to write all this code all over again every single time, and that gets kind of tedious. In fact, it gets really tedious really quickly. And so developers being, I'm not going to say lazy, I'm going to say efficient. Oh, apparently the camera's been frozen for the past 25 minutes. I'm about to take a break in about 5 minutes, Calgary, and I will unplug it and plug it back in then. So developers being efficient started looking at this code and going, well, what can I abstract out of this? Well, most of what I can abstract is this stuff. This stuff that I'm going to have to do every single time over and over and over again. So I'm going to take this code here, and I'm going to have, I'm just going to call it make Ajax, and I'm going to pass in a URL. So I will URL, and so then it sends that request. Oh, two things I need. URL, and I need a callback. So now here, I would call make Ajax. Oops. Actually, I kind of need that real quick. It's totally cheating, but I'm fine with that. And I need alert contents. And now that code's a lot easier to work with. Now, every time I need to make an Ajax request, I now have a method that I can just send it a URL, send it a callback function, and it's going to go do the thing. So that makes it easier to start building a whole bunch of different Ajax actions that need to occur. But I've kind of backed myself into a corner here. The corner that I've backed myself into is this only works for GET requests. So, okay, well now I need to, get, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, method, and I'm going to add it here. Like I start having to add parameters. I start having to get more custom with it. And that now it's not necessarily doing everything that I want it to be doing, or as easily as I want it to be doing it. And that brings us up to roughly about 2008, 2007, 2008, when we started to see the lovely thing called jQuery. But for 7 years, literally, this is how asynchronous stuff on the web was built, is it was all manually done, and people started writing libraries around Ajax to make this easier, but everybody had an opinion, and they were all right and they were all wrong. Just ask them, they tell you. But when jQuery came along, that was a game changer. So let's take a break, A, so I can reset the camera, and B, so that I can rewrite a different version of this code. And when you come back, we'll look at how this gets done with jQuery and a far more streamlined approach for doing it. Okay, so now that Calgary can see me again, sorry guys. Here's the version of what we just did with Ajax. Now, I will point out that this entire HTML page is now 30 lines long, whereas before we had 33 lines that were just JavaScript. So here is Ajax in jQuery. The logic hasn't changed at all. Here on line 22, I am binding a click action to the Ajax button. And when that click action happens, I'm going to call make request. Make request is a function, and it's going to use $jQuery.ajax. The Ajax function gets passed an object that has a couple keys on it that we need, the URL that we're going to fetch from, the method that we're going to use, and then I have a success and a failure key there, and each one of those has a function in it. Because I know you all read Sherlock Holmes in your spare time, you can probably deduce that success is the function that's going to run when we successfully get content back. Success in this case is defined by the HTTP status code. If we get back something that's in the 200s or 300s, it worked. If we get back something in the 400s or 500s, it did not work. So that would be the failure function. So in this case, the success, we will take the response in, we will log out that we got a response, and then we will set the attribute of the results image to be response.message. And if it fails, we will log out why'd that fail. And this works. I have it loaded here in the browser. Make a request. Got a response. Dog. Make a request. Got a response. Dog. So that's the jQuery version. Here's the non-jQuery version. Still works. No faster, no slower. And they both do the exact same thing. So if they both do the exact same thing, why do we need jQuery? Easy question. Which would you rather work on? 17 lines of code or 30? That's an easy answer for me. The other thing that's really cool about this is you're guaranteed, because it's the promise that jQuery provides, that this implementation of Ajax is going to do the exact same thing on every single platform in which you run it. So no having to write if statements for whether you're on mobile or if you're in Opera Mini or you're on Safari or whatever kind of weird condition you might have to account for a browser having a different implementation. They've already done that. And so this gives us the ability now to really have a powerful way to programmatically deal with a few things. Now you'll notice that there's some things that I had to do in the first version that I did not have to do in the second version. For example, it saw the response and automatically converted it to JSON for me. How do you think it did that? Give you a hint. The answer starts with H. I'll give 2 virtual cookies to whoever gets it right. I mean, that's 2 cookies. That's a pretty sizable prize. Starts with H. Yes, 2 cookies to you. Headers. The headers, when they come back, tell us what content type is being sent back, if the API is any good. Normally, the standard for web is text/HTML. That's the standard. But in this case, the API is sending back JSON. And so jQuery goes, oh, you've got a header that says you're sending back JSON? Cool, I can deal with that. It took care of it for me. If I knew that I was expecting JSON, I can add a data type JSON key to my Ajax configuration, and then it will guarantee that no matter what the header is, when response gets populated here by jQuery, it will automatically be JSON.parsed. And this is the full Ajax function that exists, and there's a whole bunch of options, and I strongly encourage you to go and read the jQuery documentation for Ajax, not just because you want to cure insomnia, but because there's actually some valid stuff there. But developers, being, once again, efficient, not lazy, might look at this and go, well, you know what, Don? I know that the dog API is always up. They've invested some serious money in that enterprise product, and the dog API is just always going to be there. I can guarantee that if I make a request, I'm going to get a response back. And I know that I'm always going to use a GET request, and I know that I'm always going to get JSON back. So why don't we simplify this? And so what jQuery did was they added some wrapper methods, and that's wrapper as in W-R-A-P-P-E-R, not like Kanye, that allow us to simplify our syntax. So we can take all of this and we can rewrite it as it's kind of ugly, but there we go, that's better. These 4 lines do almost exactly the same thing as all of these lines. The one difference between the two is that the second one, the getJSON, doesn't have a failure function. So if it fails, it's going to fail silently. But if you are calling an API that you are pretty sure is up, like, for example, let's say it's your own server, and if the server wasn't up, the page with this code on it would have never gotten sent to the client, then you might want to just simplify this and call .getJSON. It automatically performs a GET request to the first parameter, which is the URL. It automatically formats the response as JSON.parse, and takes that and passes it into the success function, which is the second parameter. And that simplifies things greatly. And especially if I were to, let's say, take this, and I was to make myself a new function. Like this, because functions are free, I can have them. Now, I just have one line of code doing all of this. Far easier to maintain. I mean, of course, I can also take this and just do that, and it simplifies things. But the jQuery version of Ajax became the industry standard very quickly because it simplified this process of working with Ajax so much and allowed you to write clean, standards, compliant, browser-compatible code and have it just work. Have I lost anyone so far? Okay, so you're either lying to me or very confident, and I will take either one. So, let's actually build ourselves something legitimate using jQuery Ajax. So, there's something called the JSON placeholder API. It's just a fake API that's available for developers. The thing that makes this one nice, and also the dog API that I was just using, is both of those, and there's a couple other APIs that do it, both of those allow requests from anywhere on the internet to come in to them. One of the interesting things about Ajax is it falls under the browser's security policy, which means I can't just Ajax any content from anywhere and load it into my page. I have to know that the server that I'm connecting to is going to allow me to make that request. And the technology that's behind this, or the principle behind this, is something called CORS, which stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So CORS is part of the browser security policy. And basically it says that because JSON data or XML data is considered application data, you as a server have to give permission to the domains that are requesting data from you. So if you've ever gone and, well, you probably dealt with it when you were doing the GitHub Avatar Downloader, and you had to go, sign up, make a GitHub app so that you could get a token, and you had to put in a URL that you were going to be requesting from. That whitelists that URL on the server's CORS configuration and says, this is a known domain that is going to make a request from our server. Otherwise, GitHub says, no, you're not allowed to request data from us, and you would actually get a CORS error back. And so this is part of what we have to work with is, if we're going to be pulling data from public APIs, we have to make sure that either A, we've registered with them so that they know our domain is requesting, or B, that it's one like the JSON placeholder or the dog CEO, where you can just request random data, and literally their CORS policy is asterisk everything. It's just wildcarded. They let everybody make requests. Sadly, that gets referred to as a promiscuous policy. I can't make these terms up. It's legit. You can look it up. You can Google it. Be careful when you Google promiscuous, by the way. So JSON placeholder API. It's really cool because it allows us to test things with fake data, and we can get a whole bunch of different things: posts, comments, albums, photos, to-dos, and users. So there's 6. These are the common resources that you can pull data from with the JSON placeholder API. So for example, if I request data for users, I get back users. And these are just JSON objects that represent a user. The data doesn't have to match. It's all randomly generated each time the request comes in. But we get their name, their username, their email, their street address, their geo coordinates, a phone number, what website, what company they're with. It's like a contact card. And if we look at, bless you, for example, posts, it's lorem ipsum. So it's just random posts, which user ID, the ID of the article, the title of the article, and the body of the article. So we are able to now take this data and mock up some code against it to be able to make sure that our AJAX code is going to work the way we want it to. So since we know that we can just make requests against this URL and get JSON back, that's a good place to start. So we will start off and we will borrow this bit of header here. And I'll put my actual JavaScript in a separate file. Okay. So to start off with, we'll open it in the browser, and it will do nothing. So that's a problem we need to fix. This is Crumb's kind of error-driven development kind of mentality. Well, it doesn't work. I see no content. Well, it's because I haven't fetched any yet. So let's fetch some content. To start off with, when we're dealing with asynchronous requests, because we don't know when the response is going to come back, we as developers have to take care that the user knows that there's something going on. So when you're on the web and you click a button to, for example, load more comments, what do you typically see? Before more comments, by the way. Yeah, a spinner. So I need a loading GIF. That one looks good. It's not copyright infringement if it's for educational purposes. So, and actually, we're going to use better tags. There we go. So we're going to have a section here with an ID of content. Cool. Now when I reload, I get that. And if I were a patient person, I might even sit here for a few moments, expecting something to happen. But nothing's going to happen, so that's a problem. That's an error. I'm not getting content, and the loading GIF never goes away. I need to fix that. So, now let's make our JavaScript file. So on document ready, what we're going to do is we're going to make a request to the posts on JSON placeholder API. So that was this URL here. And I'm going to say just it's going to go to a method called handle posts. Let me turn on word wrap. Handle posts. And it's going to get post data. And because I've told it that I'm using getJSON, it'll automatically be parsed as JSON. So I know that posts as an argument to this function is going to be an array of objects. So what I can now do is check that I got post back. And the first thing I can do is get rid of the loading GIF. And then the next thing I can do is loop through. I keep forgetting that I can use ES6 in the browser. I can loop through, and for each post, I'm going to make an article. And I'm going to make, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do that. You're supposed to catch that too. Thank you. I'm going to make a header, and I'm going to set the text of that to be the post title. And I'm going to pin that to the article. And then I'm going to create a paragraph, set the text of that to be the post body, and append that to the article. And then I'm going to say content dot append a, my article. So I'm going to loop through all the articles. I'm going to make a header and a paragraph, put the content in there, and append them all to the content. So the loading GIF goes away. Everybody comfortable with that code? Did I screw up anywhere? Now's the time to tell me. Okay, so let's see if it works. Refresh. Boom, we have posts. They're not terribly formatted. I'm not winning any design awards for this unless it's a minimalism award. But I now have, some information here. Let's add like 9 seconds of styling. Border bottom, 2 pixels, solid light gray. Padding, 5 pixels, 10 pixels, and margin bottom, 5px. Sure. Oh, it helps if you close your style tag. There, much better. It's beautiful now. Could not ask for better. In fact, that's probably somebody's blog template. The problem is I'm missing some of the data that I would have had that I'm actually getting back from the JSON placeholder API. So this is my header, and this is my title. Let's make that a little bit more apparent with some context. There we go. So now I've got my header and my body here. But what do I not have? Like, who wrote it? I don't have any author information here. So now we're in an interesting situation where I have pulled this data from the API, but I only have one set of the data that I need. There's technically 2 sets of data that I need. So I have to make 2 AJAX requests. So I know that these have a user ID on them. Apparently users 1 and 2, and okay, it does get better, but over here on my users have an ID. So I know that I have shared information in both of these sets of data that I can use to match up a user with an article. That gets kind of powerful. Because that means if I can get both of those sets of data, programmatically, I can figure out which user data is connected to which article and show the full blog data the way it was meant to be done. So, how we do that, we're now basically done with the HTML, so I will just full screen this now. So when we're going to get into handle posts, we're going to have to ask ourselves a question. So I can write another get JSON. And put this here. But then what goes there? And even more importantly, how do I get that user data over here where I need it? You tell me more. You're not wrong, tell me more. The answer here is callback, Calgary. I do have to give it a callback, but here's the thing. I'm in the callback for getting my posts. And here's my logic here for handling my posts. But I want to be able to connect that post data to my user's data. So how do I do that? I do have to get the user's data first. So let's just say we're going to have a function called handle users. Awesome. Now I have a list of users that has been passed in to this function for me. Now what do I do? Does anybody remember the commercial from the 90s? I know it's a long time ago, where a man and a woman are walking down the street, like on opposite sides of a building, heading to a street corner together. One of them's eating a chocolate bar, and one of them, for some reason, is walking down a city street eating peanut butter right out of a jar. And they get to the street corner, and they collide. And it ends up, suggestively, that the gentleman's chocolate bar ends up in the woman's jar of peanut butter. And it's a Reese's commercial. And they exclaim, "You got your chocolate in my peanut butter. You got your peanut butter on my chocolate. Two great tastes, one great product." That was literally the slogan. We kind of have to do that here. We have to be creative. We have to get our post data and our user data in the same place at the same time. So this doesn't actually work for us. So here's what we would want to do here. We're going to put our function here for dealing with our users. And move this up here. Posts are still in scope. ID user mapping, you are 100% correct, which is a fancy term for what we're about to do. So basically this logic now says, if we got posts back, because if there's no posts, there's no point in doing all the other work. So if we get posts back, we're going to request data from the users API and get that set of users back. So now we've got posts and users in the same scope. The chocolate and the peanut butter have come together. Now what we can do is for each over each post, and we can make the header, which has got the post title in it, and then we can take the post.userID and find the right user from the users array. One line of code. That will look through the users array, find the user whose ID parameter is the same as the user ID parameter on the post. And now what we can do is set the text of a strong tag and append it to the article with the user's name and email address. And then we make our paragraph tag with a post body in it again. And that API still works, so there's no point in refreshing that page. And then this fails completely miserably. Because, oh no, there it goes. Written by undefined. So something's not quite working quite the way we wanted it to. Cool. That's fine. But we got our data back, and it took a minute. And the nice thing is because we moved all of this logic into here, we don't get rid of the loading GIF until we've made both AJAX calls. So now we just need to figure out why the user bailed the way it did. Let's start off by making sure, okay, this parameter is ID, and posts, it is user ID, yes. Okay, so I capitalized everything correctly. Britt is typing. Hopefully she's going to point out the flaw in my code. Can we store the users in an object? Well, the users are an object. It's an array of objects right now. They are actually stored here in memory. Like that's a param that's in scope inside this function. And it's still in scope even though we're in here. Well, let's console.log out. Let's start off just by logging out users. And make sure we're getting back what we would expect. There's our users. Okay. Is the get.json run for every post? No, the get.json is run all at once. It's run after we get all the post data. Users is what I'm running the .find on, but that's the parameter for each user. .find is like .filter, .map. .find finds the first one for which this returns true. So let's see what it's saying for our user. Okay, so it's actually returning these. Nope, it's returning the right user each time. Oh, that's where I screwed up. Thanks for making me look at the pluralization. There we go. And now we've just built ourselves a blog app. And the interesting thing is, now at this point, now that we have access to the post content and we have access to the user content, however we choose to display this now is just formatting in CSS. Like that's the implementation part. Now that we know how to build, getting these two sets of data together, well, now we can do whatever the heck we want. It's just now we're starting to run into a little bit of what's called callback hell. Because we have our document ready function, which is a callback. Then the work is being done inside handle posts, which is inside the if condition, which is inside the get.json, which is inside the for each. So if we want to make this better, actually, let's make it worse first. Let's make it worse first, and then we'll make it better. Because with JSON placeholder, we can also get comments that have a post ID on them. So now we can match up how many comments each post has. So let's make this worse before we make it better. And what we're going to do now carry the two, yes, okay. And then we'll make a footer, and we will set the text and append to A, and comments dot filter comment post ID equals post.id dot length. So that'll tell us how many comments there are. Filter will, of course, give us back all the ones for all of the elements of the array for which the callback function returned true. And then dot length is just going to give us the length of the resulting array. Okay. Cool. Man, that's ugly. Okay. There we go. Anyone want to take a guess as to why that came back so quickly that time? Caching. Basically, it's made the same request a few times, so we're just getting the same data back over and over again. That's happening on the server side. It's like this IP address keeps requesting this same stuff, so it just cached the version that it gave to us, and instead of having to recompute it every time. That first time we requested posts and users, it was long, but now it's quick. So comments, the way they're broken down is it's 5 comments for every one, so that's not terribly exciting, but we got the content to show there. So now what we want to do is we want to go the step of refactoring this. So if we want to refactor this, the biggest problem we're going to have to deal with is scope. We have to make sure that our posts, users, and comments all stay in scope for us to be able to do this. So let's start off with how do we want to do this? What have I gotten myself into? Okay. So we'll start off with this functionality here, which is the innermost one. And what we're going to do is we'll keep that, but we're going to say build post, users, and comments. We'll pass all of that data to build post. That shows you how deeply we were indented. Okay, so technically, that by itself should keep working. There was 5 comments for every single post. Was that actually correct? Great question. We can confirm by looking at the comments one. Post ID 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Post ID 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. There are 5 comments for every post. It's not terribly original, unfortunately. But good call on getting me to verify that. Thank you, Christian. So just this one change here. We've got post. So we can get post.title, post.userid, post.id, all of that we should still be able to get. And we're passing in the full arrays for users and comments. So we should be able to still access all the data that we need. Let's make sure that this still works. Cool, it works. Even if I do a hard refresh, code still goes. So then the next thing that we need to look at is how we can handle the rest of it and we have to ask ourselves, does it get us anything extra to go further? Anytime you're refactoring, you're going to make one step at a time, make sure it works, and then ask yourself the question, does it win me anything to go further? Is the code going to get more maintainable, more efficient, more usable, more readable? That's the question I want to ask myself each and every time I want to push this further. And now I've got a very visible, like, chevron going on in my code. But based on what this code does, can you show us the appending grandchildren, like a list of comments? I was just getting the length, but we could make comments for each one of them if we really wanted to, I guess. Wondering in terms of having a class comments. Oh, you want to get into the styling of it. It's not hard. So instead of doing the length, we would filter out the list of comments here. And I'll just take the footer and I will append it to the article. I will make, let's say, something like an H4, set the text to be comments, append to footer, comments.forEach, comment. Let's build ourselves a paragraph, add class comment, set the text to be comment dot, what is it, text? Comment dot body. And append to footer. I'm not going to worry about like the email address of who wrote it. That's an exercise for you. So API still works. Good. So now they're not really showing as comments, so we need to fix that. So let's fix that. And we would do that by going in here. And we're going to have margin left, let's say 20%, font size 0.8 EM. Actually, let's just do an overall margin and fix things. So there's going to be like 5 pixels, 5 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 5 pixels on the bottom, 20%, and we'll do another bottom border here, or border bottom. 1px solid black. Actually, we'll do dashed. Ooh, fancy. Yeah, that'll work. Should work. Did I save the file? I saved the file. Footer, if you know comments. Ooh. Oops. So it didn't exactly do what we wanted it to do. And that's because I looped through all of the comments as opposed to comments for post. Oh, wow, look at that. So now we have comments. Is that what you were looking for, Britta? You're welcome. Does that make sense what I did? Cool. Yeah, and getting the naming correct was harder than the code. So yeah, going back to the question I was asking before, though, what we have to ask ourselves is, from where we are right now with this handle post function, even though we've got a very clear chevron here, is it actually going to benefit us any further to try and abstract out any of this into a method? Making a method for this. Okay. Making a method out of finding the right user, making a method out of filtering out the posts. It definitely follows what we would call the single responsibility principle, meaning each function has one job. We said this function is the build post function, therefore it shouldn't be filtering users and filtering comments and finding users and filtering comments. Yeah, that's not the worst idea. We can get rid of the console.log. And theoretically, we can't even take this and break it out into a separate function because we'd have to get the footer variable in scope there. So, if we were going to write the next step of better code. That is correct, but I have to have it passed in here to have scope, because I only have users if I have a length of posts and before I have comments. So, and then we do the same thing. Find comments. And there we go. And that's about, with jQuery, that's about as far as we can take this. And have it be still comfortable and easy to read. It's possible we could maybe take this whole section that is the footer and break it out into a function to build the footer, but that's just compartmentalizing stuff, like it's siloing different tasks at this point. Might be better, might be worse, it's up to you. You have to decide whether that's more readable or not. Okay. Yeah, so that's the next step. Is the next step from what we've done here would be to use what's called templating. And templating, the cool thing is you've technically already used templating, EJS. EJS is templating. You build a file that is, or a string basically, that is the markup that you want to have with variables interpolated in it. And then anytime you want that particular block of layout, you simply evaluate it and pass the right variables to it, and ta-da! EJS files are templates. And you can do the same thing. jQuery actually has a templating library built into it or accompanying with it that's quite easy to use. That would be how we would make this better. But for the basic function of jQuery of like building elements and using Ajax and getting them to work together, this is not in a terrible place right now. Like, there is a whole lot of production code out there in the world that is worse than this. Sadly, I hate to admit that. Some of it I wrote. So this puts us in a good place. And the interesting thing is when we look at our document ready, we have all these functions here that define all of this behavior. The only line of code that is actually being executed in our document ready, other than defining these functions, is just that one line. So everything gets triggered by that one line. And, if we wanted to not have it be the loading GIF and then the content, if we wanted the loading GIF and maybe put a refresh button there, that would just be wrapping this in a button.onClick. That would be the only difference. So, we do the button on click, we'd put the loading GIF in, load all the content, that would get emptied out and replaced with posts. But now we've got, a proper blog app for at least read-only. The next thing we'd want to do is be able to add a comment of our own. And that's about it. Cool. Any questions about how I got to this point? Keep in mind, we started way back here with this one, like the HTTP request. Well, XML HTTP request and dogs. And now we're up here to, honestly, 40 lines of code. So same amount of JavaScript, but pulling all this content for an entire set of blog users and posts and comments. So that's the benefit of doing jQuery with or Ajax with jQuery. I'm getting a lot of eye glaze juice. Calgary, how are you doing? Eye glaze juicing there too. Cool. So what I will do is I will send out all of the, all this code, the first version, the second version with jQuery. I'll send out all the notes I made, like this stuff and the cores stuff, and then also the placeholder code. I'm also going to send you a link to the jQuery Ajax documentation. Like I said, it's close to required reading because you really need to know what that does, especially because hypothetically, let's say you're building a clone of Twitter, and I know, crazy idea. You might want to be fetching posts from somewhere using Ajax, and knowing what all those options are and when to use them would be really helpful. Cool. Thanks, folks.